So I'd like to introduce our first speaker, who I know is going to inspire us. He's probably going to challenge a lot of us. Prepare yourself to be challenged, certainly in thinking and to think with the big picture. Tom Shakespeare, or Professor Tom Shakespeare, as I should say, is a professor of disability research at Norwich Medical School. For the past 30 years, my pretty little 12 years, for the past 30 years, he's been researching disability and what that means. He's worked at the World Health Organization for 5 years, where he's published a really critical report on the World Report on Disability. More locally here in the United Kingdom, he's a member of the Nuffield Council on Bioethics, and locally, he's a trustee of a local organization near where he lives called Equal Lives, which is supporting disability and disabled people in Norfolk, where he lives. Thank you very much, Professor. Thank you very much, Tom. Most welcome.
Good morning, everybody who has an XX chromosome. Good morning, everybody who has an XY chromosome. And good morning to those who have less usual sex chromosome variants, but are also very welcome. Slightly odd way of saying hello. Shouldn't I say traditionally, good morning, ladies and gentlemen? Wouldn't that be more appropriate? And nothing inaccurate in what I said, it was just inappropriate. But maybe I should introduce myself. I have a G to A transposition at 0.38 of my FGFR3 gene.
And you look very well on it.
I am. Surprisingly, I am. It's entirely accurate. In fact, this morning, I should admit to you, I'm suffering from WHSISKY syndrome. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it. It's quite common in Scotland after a good night. But you've heard, I'm a sociologist. I have 2 children. I'm miserable today, who also have my genetic condition. I'm miserable this week because I support Newcastle United Football Club. You see, now you're getting relevant information. Now you're understanding the real me. The G to A transposition at 0.380 of my FGFR3 gene, your XX or XY chromosome really tell us very little about you. So I think we need to think about these issues in the right language. Let me start by talking about disability. 1 billion people, 15% of the world's population are affected by disability, live with disability. 1 billion people, a huge number. So when we're talking about 1 in 20,000 people being affected by my condition, or even 1 in 2,000 being affected by pneumofibromatosis, or 1 in 3,000 being affected by Duchenne, or 1 in 10,000 being affected by SMA, then that global disability prevalence figure, that 15%, 1 in 7, should make us think. There's lots of arguments about how we should understand disability. Traditionally, we thought of disability as meaning people with health conditions, which caused them problems, which resulted in social disadvantage. We started at the biological, like me introducing myself as having a G to A transposition. But then the disability movement came along. It's been around 30 years or whatever. Not as long as Poland, but still hopefully making a difference in millions of people's lives. And the disability movement said, let's not just think about individuals and their deficits. Let's look at society. Let's look at environments. Let's look at structures. All the very many barriers placed in our way which disable us. We are disabled by society, not by our bodies, they said. Negative attitudes, inadequate or inappropriate schooling, discrimination in employment, physical or information barriers. The disability movement said that if we removed more of those barriers, we would see more disabled people succeeding. And we did that, and we have seen that. Over the last decades, we've seen a transformation of possibility for disabled people in participating in society. I flew up here last night. The airport was accessible. I got a taxi to my hotel. The taxi was accessible. My hotel room was accessible. This venue is accessible. Now, I know that this picture in the United Kingdom is not echoed throughout Europe, but it shows what can be done and where we can be. It's not perfect. It's not sufficient. But I think we are going in the right direction. Except, in fact, in countries like the UK, where over the last few governments, we've really rolled back on welfare support for disabled people. We've made disabled people's lives much, much harder, and that of their families, by political decisions to row back on our rights. Now, the disability movement thinking about the way we're disabled by society is known as the social model of disability. And I support it up to a point. In my own research, I've tried to say the situation's a bit more complicated. I don't think we should medicalize disability. I don't think you should think of me as a G to A transposition of 0.38 in my FGFR3 gene. But equally, we can't say that it's just all about society and not about our bodies and minds. So my thinking is very simple. I think we are disabled by society as well as by our bodies. We need to remove barriers and provide services, but we also need to meet medical needs, provide rehabilitation, and attend to psychological needs as well. In other words, disability is multifactorial. It affects our bodies, our minds, our environments, our interrelations, our legal rights, the whole lot. So we need a combined solution. Yes to genetic research, but also to nocturnal home ventilation, because that's extended the lives of boys with Duchenne more than anything else that we can think of. Healthcare, yes, but also better education provision and access to work and better community living situation solutions and so on. Disabled people face a lot of different problems, and we can't think there's only one way of solving them. I remember one of my first meetings with Katie Bushby, who was the clinical geneticist who asked me to speak here today. And she knew about my research, and I've increasingly known about hers. And she said, I can help my muscular dystrophy patients with their health needs, but I want to work with a social worker and a support worker to help them with their welfare benefits, their housing, and their other needs. She said, I'm a doctor. I don't know about that stuff, but that's what they really need, and that's what will really help them. And I said to her, Katie, you go with the medicine, we'll try to do the rest, we'll work together. We need appropriate solutions relevant to each different problem. For example, as you know, I have achondroplasia. What's the appropriate solution for me and my family, my children? We're small, we can't reach things, we get stared at. You could say we need limb lengthening in childhood. We all said no. We didn't want a very painful set of operations which will leave us in a wheelchair for several years, and infections and all sorts of other horrible things, and we'd gain 6 inches in height. What we'd do is we'd move the light switch. That might be more helpful. And the same goes for very expensive treatments which are now available for achondroplasia. The chief executive of Biomarin tells his investors there are 24,000 young people with achondroplasia in his addressable market. Please don't spend hundreds of thousands of pounds per person per year to provide a pharmaceutical solution to my lack of height, or that of my children, or that of my friends. It's not required. Human beings come in different shapes and sizes. We need to change the world to accept that fact not change us to fit into the world. I look at the program for this conference, and I see more than anything else the medicalization of disability. Where's the social change? Where's the educational inclusion? Where's the support for independent living? I read through it and I found one paper on independent living. I was so happy about that. One poster. There are 2 sessions on game changers for social care and game changers at an international level. But even those, there's lots of stuff, more stuff about medicine. We need the sessions on medicine, absolutely. But we need the stuff on changing the world as well. I agree. Mine is a trivial disability. And when people are going to die or lead a radically foreshortened lifespan because of their condition, for sure, we need to invest and we need to understand and we need to solve. But we also need those other things while people are waiting and to address the multifactorial causes of disability. Because I think we need some realism here. As Alistair said, there are, whatever it is, 7,000 single gene disorders. So to identify them, to understand the genetics, takes a lot of expensive molecular biology. And then we have to develop treatment for each disease, costing even more and taking decades and decades. And the solution's still elusive. I think so far, I read we have 106 new medicines which have been approved thanks to the Orphan Drugs Act, and that's fantastic news. But 106 medicines, 7,000 rare diseases. It's going to take a long time to find all those solutions. We're going to be waiting, and in the meantime, we need to be acting. And if we do succeed in these 2 steps to identify the genetics and to find the cure, we're going to have to pay for the treatment. Rare disease drugs are expensive and getting more expensive. $84,000 a year for Jakafi. $294,000 a year for Ifacithor. Forgive me if I've pronounced them wrong. $380,000 a year for Vimizim. Now, we know that these are rare diseases by definition. Not so many people are affected. But that's a huge cost. Even with patient assistance programs, that's a huge cost. In the old days, Big Pharma made its money with a mass-market drug which sold fairly cheaply to billions of people. And now pharma sees profits in drugs with fewer users, but with exorbitant pricing. They exploit the good fundraising and clinical trial support of patient support groups like you. And then when they want to sell the drug, they don't need a sales workforce. You do it. In the words of a Lancet editorial last year, Lancet, the major medical journal in the world, quote, "Drug companies have exploited the existing situation and ultimately patients and healthcare systems." The growth in sales of orphan drugs is 11% a year. The growth in sales of drugs for general population is 4% a year. No wonder the industry is interested in orphan drugs. No wonder the accountants interested. No wonder Alistair had to find a bigger room for his meeting about orphan drugs. It's not surprising. It's where the money is. Meanwhile, in the UK, the National Health Service can't afford the proven cancer drugs which extend lives. We read every day of shortfalls in the NHS. So, are we now going to spend $8 million lifetime costs of a CF patient on Ifactor? And that's in the UK. There's a huge variation in the ability of different regions, different countries to spend money on drugs. I do a lot of research in Africa, and the average African in the countries I go to is living on $1 a day. So compare that with $380,000 a year for Vimizim. So, and remember that the majority of the world's people with rare diseases live in low and middle income countries. Our Scottish minister today was talking about the 300,000 people affected by rare diseases in rare conditions in Scotland. If she's going to pay for drugs for all those people, that's going to be £30 billion a a year. I can't remember what the budget for the Scottish government is, but I think it's, that's going to be a challenge, let's put it that way. So this is unsustainable. There has to be a limit to the drugs bill. We need government and industry and indeed patient groups to work together to agree a reasonable margin of profit for the development costs of the new drugs we need. We need the drugs, we can't afford the bill. The US Senate said in 2014 we have to have proportionality between production cost and pricing. Yes, incentives, yes, make a profit. Don't try and screw the health system on the back of people with rare diseases. So, as I said, we need to focus on appropriate solutions. Yes, save lives. Yes, prevent major impairment, but also remove barriers to include people. And if we're thinking about global solutions, let me remind you again of what the disability movement has been saying for the past 40 years. People are disabled by society in all sorts of ways. And I want to tell you about a new wonder drug which is beginning to address that exclusion worldwide. And this drug doesn't have a complicated name. Let's call it CRPD. And CRPD can reach the parts that other interventions cannot reach. It's a wonder drug because it's relevant to all 6,000 rare disorders. It's relevant to every single one of the billion disabled people in the world. It's relevant to all causes and all situations. But it's not a drug which is going to bring profits for shareholders. 164 countries have ratified CRPD. And by now you know, of course, that the CRPD stands for the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. Let me read you Article 1. The purpose of the present convention is to promote, protect, and ensure the full and equal enjoyment of all human rights and fundamental freedoms by all persons with disabilities and to promote respect for their inherent dignity. Persons with disabilities include those who have long-term physical, mental, intellectual, or sensory impairments which, in interaction with various barriers, may hinder their full and effective participation in society on an equal basis with others. In other words, the CRPD applies to everyone here. And the philosophy of the CRPD, equal rights, anti-discrimination, barrier removal, reasonable accommodation, respect, inclusion, equality. I'm sure none of you disagree with those words, however much you're challenged by what I've said earlier. The 50 articles of the Convention cover all aspects of life. Healthcare, Article 25, rehabilitation, Article 26, independent living, Article 19, education, Article 24, employment, Article 27, transport, can't remember which article. Every aspect of life, really trying to say disabled people have rights, they should be able to participate, they should be able to have partners and families and leisure and sport and access information, media. When the CRPD is implemented properly, it affects every person with a rare disease and everyone who is born in years to come. Because when we make buildings like this one accessible, they're going to be accessible forever for everyone because we got it right from the start. When the new tram to the airport is accessible, it's accessible for all time. We save costs in the long run, and people can work, play, be educated. That's the leveraging effect of a legal and political solution that applies to everyone. And how does the CRPD work? What's the mechanism of action? Each of those 164 countries have to make a report every 3 years on how they have promoted, protected, and ensured the human rights of persons with disability. And they're held to account by a committee on the rights of persons with disabilities in Geneva. Those countries that do wrong are named and shamed. And in this way, the barriers come down. What's a committee? What can it do? Well, it can do a lot. I was there when the Chinese were reporting to the committee and when they were being analyzed and judgment was being passed on them. They brought 50 people along. They were very, very anxious that they were not criticized by that UN committee. So it can work. And many of us in the United Kingdom hope that it will work to bring our government to account and to change its policies in terms of disability. So let me draw to a conclusion. 3 points. By all means, keep doing the science, keep developing the drugs. I welcome that, we need that. But surely, as a European set of societies, let's come to a reasonable, sustainable settlement on the costs of orphan drugs. Secondly, recognize that disability is multifactorial. We need to address psychological, social, political dimensions of life with a rare disease, not just the biochemical aspect. Let's have more sessions in this conference about access to school, about having relationships, about solutions for independent living, about technologies to enable people to communicate, about all those other aspects that we people with disability know we need and are desperate to get. Because, thirdly, people with rare diseases are, above all, disabled people. And if we, regardless of our genetic spelling mistake, connect with each other, we're part of a global community of 1 billion disabled people. And with this global treaty, the CRPD, we can hold governments to account. We can document human rights abuses. And we need to contribute to monitoring and reporting. So that's my final message. Please, make use of the CRPD, because the real game changer is not this or that highly expensive drug, but this highly effective human rights approach to disability. Thank you.